What is being billed as the very first UN report to clearly link climate change and population issues was released today by the UN Population Fund. This report says women are on the front lines of climate change and they have less ability to get out of the way. Also, their access to reproductive health care and their ability to plan their families will determine whether the world needs to plan for 8 billion people on the planet in 2050 or we should plan for 11 billion people. Clean Skies Margaret Ryan has more after hearing the reports released today. Margaret, 3 billion people is a pretty wide margin of error here.
Indeed it is, Tyler, and here is the study, the State of World Population 2009, and this says it really attempts to put a human face on climate change. It says women around the globe, even in developed nations, simply have less education, less income, and fewer resources to escape climate disasters. And it says they're the most exposed, especially in the poorest areas. They're trying to adapt and survive changing climates. But so far, climate treaty negotiators haven't addressed the key role that women are playing. And so, though it's late in the Copenhagen process, women's advocates are going to be in Denmark next month arguing that gender differences have to be recognized, particularly in those adaptation programs, because women are the ones on the ground who will determine whether these programs work or not. And women will also determine in the long term, as you mentioned, the size of the climate change problem. I mean, there is a fundamental difference between supplying a clean energy path for 8 billion people and supplying one for 11 billion people. And climate negotiators know that. Now, the good news is researchers say there's no coercive government programs needed. There's no new technology needed. We know from experience that women want to have access to information on their reproductive choices. And once they have that kind of information and have access to health care, they tend to have fewer children. They tend to have them later. That gives you the lower climate projections there. Former Senator Tim Wirth, head of the UN Foundation, said today, this new report really weaves together two issues, population and climate, in a coherent narrative and shows you really can't deal with one without dealing with the other.
Well, with regard to those projections, Margaret, we have 6.8 billion people roughly on the globe right now. With the UN study in mind, where is it projecting the growth to come between now and 2050?
Well, the big growth is Africa and Asia. I mean, let me just give you some of the numbers that are in the tables on this report. The median projection between that 8 and 11 is 9.1 billion people. And that's by 2050. Africa, the population doubles from 1 billion today to 2 billion. Asia, another 1 billion people, up to 5.2 billion, with India leading the way. The Arab states grow 70%, 352 to 598 million. Europe drops some 40 million to less than 700 million. Latin America grows by 140 million people. That's up 25%. North America, US and Canada, grows by 100 million people, up from 350 today, but still relatively small compared to some of those other numbers. So, you know, outside the developed world, look, these are scary numbers. When you look back in history, when you have huge population increases in a short period of time, you do have the possibility of destabilization, political destabilization in regions, and certainly you have governments really struggling to make sure they feed and trying to bring out of poverty these hugely increasing populations.
Margaret, one more question. Since this is a UN report essentially that's out today and Copenhagen will be a UN climate conference, isn't it a little late to be talking about population issues in relation to a treaty since we're just a few weeks away from starting the last round of official talks?
Well, in fact, that question was asked and people did agree it was. Everyone said, to start off with, it's very difficult to talk about. It's so easy. And there was another discussion yesterday at the Center for American Progress, for instance. It was a book launch for a book by Laurie Mazur called A Pivotal Moment, Population Justice and the Environmental Challenge. And all the speakers agreed it's just so easy to have this turned into a way of blaming people for having children, essentially. And, you know, some early environmentalists actually did say people are the problem. You know, we have to preserve wildernesses, keep people out of there. But the speakers yesterday and today both were just stressing none of this justifies either draconian government measures or things like eugenics. That's not what we're talking about. Today, Wirth said there's almost nothing about population issues in the climate documents, and he said it's because people are scared of the issue. He said, for instance, in the U.S. it gets confused with the abortion issue. He said, and in 1994, the world's nations agreed in the Cairo Declaration to supply family planning information that women should get it worldwide, but of course that declaration hasn't been carried out. But a key number that came out today, Tyler, they say if you just give women capacity to choose whether they want to space their children, to limit the size of their families, and the projections are you have a 15 to 20% savings on greenhouse gases from taking no action there.
It's that 3 billion extra people that has me thinking about 2050. Certainly. Margaret Ryan, great report. Thank you very much.